Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking 20 minutes out of your busy schedule today to join our conversation about software as a service, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's clear that SaaS has been widely adopted by organizations of all sizes because really it covers most business needs, from enabling employee creativity and collaboration to supporting customer engagement. What we've seen at Catchpoint over the last couple of years when talking to IT leaders is that it's not just the business that benefits from SaaS. Outsourcing applications to third parties also has loads of advantages for IT, but it comes with a significant challenge by introducing a technology environment that is no longer in IT's control. In a hybrid workplace in particular, it brings up additional risk for IT teams who are delivering these services and supporting employees who rely on SaaS applications. Today's webinar is part of a series of publications aimed at IT and lines of business leaders. We're going to help you navigate the growing world of SaaS. To discuss the bigger picture and guide us through this journey, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by our guest speaker, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester, Liz Herbert. Liz, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Denis. Hi, everyone. I am great today. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Liz, I'm very excited to have you here. Let's start because I've got a burning question for you. So today, as an end user and employee myself, I'm using only SaaS applications to do my job. Office 365, MS Teams, Salesforce, they're all in the cloud. And in your recent report, Understanding the Cloud Service Provider Landscape, you mentioned that the public cloud and SaaS markets are back in hyper-growth mode. So what exactly is the current state of SaaS and how prevalent is it?
Exactly. SaaS continues to grow. It continues to rise. I joined Forrester about 20 years ago. And of course, back then, SaaS was completely in its infancy. And even for the next several years in my early career at Forrester, we saw that there were a lot of reservations about SaaS, companies very hesitant to use it for anything mission critical. And a lot of applications didn't even offer a SaaS choice. It was very novel 20 years ago. But now if you look at the world, there are more and more vendors where SaaS is the way to buy. In some cases, it's the only way to buy. In our adoption data, we're seeing that there are some categories where new purchases are over 90% SaaS. For example, categories like CRM, HR, procurement, over 90% of new purchases are now SaaS. Many times the leading vendors in those spaces only offer SaaS. And even in categories where it's been slower to take off, perhaps because of the complexity of the applications, the need for heavy customization and integration, or the need for heavy bandwidth. So these are categories like logistics management, business intelligence, core ERP. Even in those categories, we're seeing SaaS start to rise. So overall, the software as a service market is continuing to grow at double digits. While it has been higher in the US and in North America, it is also growing all over the world, throughout Europe, throughout Asia, and beyond. And we see that more and more, not only are companies recognizing the benefits of software as a service, but they're also less worried about some of the historic fears and challenges that they were facing. So that, combined with what's going on the vendor side, where many vendors are choosing to have a one version approach, means continued growth ahead for software as a service.
Okay, so it's interesting. It sounds like SaaS is not just here to stay, but it's actually here to grow. And I talked to many network teams and also service delivery teams whose job it is to make sure that the employees can use their applications wherever they are, whenever they need to, and whatever they're working on. It seems that the adoption of SaaS has introduced loads of blind spots for these teams because the traditional IT environment has evolved and is now outside of their control. So, for example, the internet is becoming the new corporate network, and the cloud is the new data center. I would imagine that adopting SaaS might present challenges that both encompass and go beyond IT. What do you hear? What are the most common challenges for these organizations who are embarking on the SaaS journey?
Exactly. So where they know about software as a service, when we survey buyers, they tell us that their biggest concerns are customization, integration, security, total cost of ownership, vendor lock-in, those tend to rotate in terms of which ones are highest. It tends to vary by space. Sometimes those specific elements are more in view depending on the purchase. But those have historically been the biggest areas of concern. And some of them are a bit of a two-sided issue, like with total cost of ownership, although we hear it and we see it in our survey data as a concern, we equally hear it and see it in our survey data as a benefit. So a lot of times it's not all one way with software as a service, but those are the known concerns. And we see organizations really thinking about how to address those. A bigger challenge for a lot of the organizations that we work with is the unknown concerns. And specifically what I mean is SaaS sprawl. It has become so easy, often for free or with a credit card, low dollar amount, to acquire software as a service. And many software as a service vendors intentionally go for a land and expand or a freemium type of a model that makes it easy for business to go and purchase it. One of the growing challenges we're seeing is how to even know what applications you're using. And that's become one of the biggest challenges for IT executives. For example, one of the clients that we work with who's in the financial services sector, they recently called Forrester and they explained that they didn't know where their SaaS products were being hosted. And I was at first confused. I thought, well, I mean, you can look in the contract or it might say on the website, you can ask them. As we're talking, what I realized is they don't know what SaaS products are there. That's why it's such a challenge to know where they're hosted or anything else about them, is because they don't really have their arms around what's there. So that's become, with the growth of SaaS, one of the hidden dark sides is this proliferation where oftentimes it's unvetted and unknown to the enterprise. So that's one of the key challenges we're seeing nowadays.
So it's a bit like shadow IT
absolutely, shadow IT.
Yeah. So when you talk to the IT organizations specifically, here you talked about shadow IT. What do they tell you about SaaS? How do they overcome these challenges?
So we see there are multiple steps in starting to overcome the challenges. One key step is typically to figure out what you're using. There are tools out there that can mine expense reports or look at what internet traffic is coming through. We've had some clients, they want to take a lighter weight approach and just ask, especially if they're a smaller organization, to get a better sense of what's being used. That tends to be a major challenge and often a first step at getting your arms around the problem. But from there, what we see is more formality in terms of how SaaS gets acquired, gets deployed, gets renewed. A lot of our clients, they're now working on SaaS acquisition checklists. So even if they decide it's totally okay for a business user to go out and buy something for their group, they may want to put a little bit more guidance around that. Oftentimes, they're also setting some guidelines in terms of if it touches certain types of data or if it's a certain dollar amount or higher or other factors like those that would suggest it's more strategic, more significant, more risk involved. They're putting it through a formal due diligence process where perhaps IT or legal or security or all of those groups need to take a look at it. So what's challenging for a lot of the organizations we work with is they need that formality. They can't have just random solutions that they don't know anything about, having employee or customer data or product data, sensitive data, et cetera. But on the other hand, they need to be careful that they don't go so heavy with the due diligence and with the controls and the governance that they stifle innovation and growth in the business and frustrate employees. So it's a balancing act. But for most organizations, we see them investing more in understanding what they have, doing due diligence, and setting up governance so that they can think smartly about what's that right balance of managing and governing while still allowing business to get what they need and not be too slowed down by some controls that become in place. That's mainly what we see companies doing. And another thing we're starting to see is proactively creating marketplaces where users can go. Essentially what they're doing is they're saying, these are already sanctioned apps. We've already looked at them. Maybe someone else in the organization brought them to our attention, or maybe we just heard about them and looked at them, they're sanctioned and approved. So if you go to the app store, sometimes that's an internally built one, sometimes that's a third-party app store. There are plenty of options there. Then you can just go pick something and you can skip all of the other steps in the checklists and the due diligence because it's already been vetted. So that's another key theme we see and something that we're actively tracking as there is so much digital buying going on.
So is there anything like, are they building SWAT teams for SaaS? Do you see that happening?
We do. Of course, larger organizations, Forrester works with a lot of multi-billion-dollar corporations. Larger organizations are often creating a formal COE. I know for some smaller organizations, this can be more like a side job for one person. But definitely figuring out, who is going to help with creating some of those tools and assets. Really the goal being, how do you let people buy in a smarter way without having to repeatedly look at every single solution? How can you have some semblance of oversight in the most efficient way possible? So that's where we see a lot of the tools, the checklist, the guidelines, as well as this marketplace approach so that you can streamline the whole system. Otherwise, it becomes unmanageable. As an example, there was one European media company we worked with where they had one person in charge of all the SaaS due diligence, but there were about 1,000 solutions. So that becomes unwieldy pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it's really about getting more strategic about how to do it efficiently.
Yeah, so it really shows how strategic and critical software as a service has become for the modern digital enterprise. In fact, when today we think of the modern workplace, we have to think of the hybrid workplace, right? So what has been the impact of the IT impact of SaaS in supporting the users to enable the productivity in this hybrid workplace? Do you see that skills requirements have changed?
A few things have gone on, post-pandemic. One is that a lot of organizations moved more aggressively to software as a service. We believe that about 3 years worth of technology growth happened within that first year of the pandemic because it was forced. People didn't expect they'd be working remotely for such a long time. So definitely the volume of SaaS moved very quickly for many organizations. And for many organizations, they had to change their thinking. They had to change their traditional procurement approaches. I know one government entity we work with really had to avoid their usual sourcing process because they needed to get some tools in there quickly. And SaaS is typically a way to do that. And so that's one factor. There's just a lot more than there was before the pandemic. The other factor, though, is, of course, people are working anywhere. They could be working on any kind of a network. They don't necessarily have the protection of being plugged into the corporate network. And most populations of employees are going to have widely varying knowledge of what you should do and security. And most companies don't want to totally lock down machines because that stifles productivity and growth and hurts employee experience. But what we're left with is that the technology management function has to really deal with this growing set of software as a service applications being used far outside their control. And so we're seeing there is a lot more burden on them. And so that's where we go back to those principles of how can you educate buyers so that you're not telling them no, but you're helping them understand, be careful if you go and buy this tool and you think you're going to put sensitive customer data in it, there is an implication. And then setting up paths so that they can more efficiently get their arms around the bigger picture without stifling really the business growth and business success, because organizations are still under a lot of pressure. There are a lot of other disruptive factors, and so they can't be too controlled such that the business can't succeed.
So it sounds a bit like it's moving from using SaaS is moving from technology delivery to business outcomes. It's blurring the line between IT and the line of business. Do you see this trend happen? What do you predict for SaaS in the next couple of years?
Well, definitely. I mean, business users are researching technology solutions. They're buying them. In many cases, they're deploying and managing them. Of course, deploying is pretty simple for most SaaS solutions, but not always. There can still be integration or configuration or even development going on. First of all, today's business user on average is very tech savvy. They often have grown up with technology. A large portion of the workplace has. So they're very comfortable configuring or doing light coding, even if that's not their formal role or they don't have formal developer experience. So that's one factor here. But we also see that they are empowered. They're able to learn much more about solutions. There's obviously a lot on the internet about availability of solutions, peer groups who can give recommendations. There are a lot of technology buying sites that show peer recommendations. And so, there are a lot of those traditional IT tasks that are now being done by the business, whether you like it or not. And then even in the ongoing management, we see that there is a lot business can do, even in terms of, like I said, some of the lightweight development, sometimes even simple integrations, because they can get a connector out of a marketplace. It doesn't always mean that business should be doing all of those tasks, and that becomes an important decision for the overall corporation to decide, where should those lines be, and try to navigate that. But definitely the line of business is doing much more. And so where you do see those more formal approaches to governance and more formal approaches to having a center of excellence for the ongoing management of these solutions, oftentimes they are actively trying to include line of business in the mix so they can work together. And in many cases, that's a win for both sides. The business likes having some more control over what they need. And oftentimes it frees up time of technology professionals to do more strategic work. They don't necessarily want to be creating a report for a sales manager when they have other projects they need to be working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Liz, let me thank you for guiding us through the world of SaaS and giving us the broad picture of its benefits and challenges. It was a real pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks very much for having Forrester here, and hope to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. And to our audience here, to dive more into the world of SaaS, please check out our reprint of Liz's full report, Quantifying the Business Value of SaaS. You will find it on our website, along with many other resources detailing how to gain control over your SaaS journey. So join us at catchpoint.com/SaaS. And until then, thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.